Hi everybody, TJ Mack, Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here. And I was thinking the other day what the first baseball team I really remember watching and following throughout the year. Now my first baseball memory is of Thurman Munson dying, and here you can see his 1979 Topps card. I was on my front porch with my brother and his friends when my mom came out and said Thurman Munson died in a plane crash. And I just remember a feeling of sadness coming over me. I didn't know a lot about baseball at that moment. I was only about 5 years old. But I knew who Thurman Munson was and that he was a famous person. And it was really my first touch with death in my life. And it was just a sadness, like I said, that just came over me. And then my next baseball memory was from the same year in the fall when the Pirates played the Orioles in the 1979 World Series. I was in kindergarten at the time, and I can remember seeing some of the series on TV, and that was when I was first exposed to the Cobra, Dave Parker, and Willie Pop Stargell. And these 79 cards depict that time perfectly with those bright yellow uniforms. And just really the charisma and electricity around that team at the time just drew me in. But my allegiance was always to the Yankees because growing up in Western New York, we didn't have a baseball team nearby. But my dad, brother, and grandfather were Yankees fans, so I became one too. Now, 1980 was the first year I started ripping a lot of packs of baseball cards, and I collected because my brother collected. And I was thrilled when I would pull Pirates or Yankees cards, and that was the year I would watch Yankees games on TV whenever they were on, which wasn't very often at that time. I'd watch them with my dad. But I mostly started following Yankees games through reading news articles in the paper. It's one of the ways that I learned how to read. My dad would sit down and we'd look at the articles together, and then I also would learn the box scores at that time. And I can't say I fully understood all the statistics, but I started to learn the players and the positions. Well, my grandfather, he used to smoke cigars, and I would take his empty Dutch Masters cigar boxes, and here's what they look like. And I'd put my baseball cards inside those cigar boxes. And I used to always think that the gentlemen on this box were pilgrims, because that's what they look like to me. But I guess they were Dutchmen, hence the name Dutch Masters. And I eventually got one of those vinyl sports card lockers with the cheap, thin plastic slots that were inside of them. They had those dividers, and you would put the cards in those dividers, and they'd have stickers with the team names on them. And the one that I had was the one that had all the different sports players on the front of it. It was like a pinkish color. And what would happen during that year is I would really start looking at those cards, and I'd have the box scores, and I would just start to, associate the players when I saw them on TV with the box scores in the paper and things like that. Now, eventually, I would start to get an idea of what the starting lineup was of the Yankees, and of course, they would mix and match players. Some games they wouldn't have the same starting lineup every day, but there was a basic lineup that I would start to get into my head. And I remember my grandparents had the coolest bar in their basement. They had these tall leather stools, a custom-made bar top, and my grandfather had this figure of a Scotsman, which I believe, looking back at it now, was an advertising piece for Dwar's white label Scotch whiskey. So he had this Scotchman figurine down there. And my grandparents and my uncles were really amazed that at my age, I would know the lineup of the Yankees team. And I would sit on a stool, and I would go through each of them. He had the catcher, Rick Cerrone, and he took over for Thurman Munson, of course. And looking at it now, I didn't realize what a good season he had. I wouldn't have known that at that age. But he had 277 that year with 14 home runs and 85 RBIs. He's a really good player at that time. And then also they had at first base, they had Bob Watson. As you're going to see here that in 1980, they didn't have Topps cards of them on the Yankees, so some of these cards are going to be their 81 Topps cards. And then, of course, at second base, we had the stolen base leader that year, Willie Randolph, one of the great second basemen of that era. And then at shortstop, you had Bucky Dent. And I just love these 1980 Topps cards, especially. These just bring back so many great memories for me. They had Greg Nettles as well. Here's the Nettles card. He was hurt that year, but he played about half the season, 88 or so games. Well, obviously one of the great third basemen of his era. And then the outfield, you had in right field, of course, Mr. October. He had a career high 300 batting average that year with 41 home runs and I think about 111 RBIs. And then in center field was Rupert Jones. Played some of the games there. They also had Bobby Brown. I'll show his card in a second. And then in left field, he had Lou Piniella. And then the ace of that rotation, of course, was Ron Guidry. Won 17 games that year. But it was actually Tommy John who won 22 games that season. That was probably their best pitcher that year. And then, of course, in the bullpen as the closer, they had Rich the Goose Gossage. Now, I didn't know all the players on the team, but, just looking back at it now, the rest of the rotation was Tom Underwood. I think he won 13 games that year. Tiant was the fourth starter. He won 8 games. I think he was 8 and 9. Jim Spencer would play some first base on that team. And then third base, when Nettles was hurt, and he also DH some, was Eric Soderholm. But they also had, I think, Aurelio Rodriguez, I think, at that time, or maybe it was Aurelio Lopez, who played third base. They had Bobby Mercer as well on those teams. Rudy May won 15 games that year. He would start also in the rotation from time to time. He was one of their better pitchers. Of course, we have Oscar Gamble, one of the great players of that time with the probably the best hairstyle of that era. And then here's Bobby Brown on this rookie card, this Future Stars card, and here's his 81 Topps card. What was cool about that Yankees team is they won 103 games that year. And then here's the team card here. You got Dick Hauser up in the corner. I just loved following them that season. They got swept by the Royals in the American League Championship, so it didn't end very well for them. And what I learned researching this was after the season, Dick Hauser became the first manager to win 100 games to be fired or resigned. Now, some say he resigned, and others think that he was fired by Steinbrenner. He was pretty defiant of George Steinbrenner's controlling behavior, and I think it drove the boss nuts. So he ended up either getting fired or resigning. Hauser would go on to coach the Royals or manage the Royals next year during the strike-shortened season towards the end of the year, and he won a World Series with them in 1985. Unfortunately, he died of brain cancer in the late 80s, so he died pretty young. But it was just really nice to relive the memories of this team, and where I'm going with this is I've been working on a project where I want to have a magazine cover and card that reminds me of my father-in-law, my father, and a player that I enjoyed growing up. So that way I have that connection between the three of us. And I've showed these before, but the one for my father-in-law was this Al Rosen 1955 Sports Illustrated cover. And this is the one that he picked up from the newsstand back then. Rosen was one of his favorite players at the time. And then I added this 1951 Bowman Al Rosen card as well to complement the magazine. And then for my father, I did Mickey Mantle. So here's the 65 Topps Mantle with the Sport Magazine cover. And Mantle was my dad's favorite player. And the 65 Topps is the first Mantle that I ever bought when I was a kid, when I was in 7th grade. So I just have that added connection with that card to my father. And then this magazine's from my father-in-law's collection. So there's just a nice connection there. And I have this 75 Sport Magazine with Reggie Jackson on the cover, along with a 75 Topps card. But this never really felt right to me to have this in the display because I didn't really follow the 70s A's teams, and I can't even say I really didn't. I didn't follow them. I was way too young at the time. I was born right around that time. So it just didn't feel right to have this magazine and card in the display because I just didn't have that connection with that team other than the fact that I really liked Reggie Jackson growing up. So what I did is I went ahead and replaced it with this beautiful August 4th, 1980 Sports Illustrated. This is a newsstand copy along with the 1980 Topps Reggie Jackson. And I just love the imagery here. You got the bokeh effect going on with the blurred out background. And then you have Reggie Jackson. Obviously, looks like he hit a home run there with the caption, going, gone. And it just connects me right back to that 1980 Yankees team that I followed at that time. So it's just a better connection for me with this magazine and card than the Oakland A's cover for my display. So just real excited to add this. This really completes that project that I was working on as far as my father, and my connection to the game. I may do something with my sons at some point to further this display, but I'm going to wait a little bit on that. So that's all I have today. I just wanted to share this project with you and just to take you back to that time of the first team that I followed. So if you're willing, please either share in the comments the first team that you remember really following, where you knew the lineup, watched them on TV, and or followed them in the box scores or news articles. You can leave it in the comments, or if you want to make a video about it, that's fine as well. But just curious, I think that's what really connects us to the hobbies, not just the cards, but it's the sports, right? At least for me it is. I love sports, and cards is just a way of further deepening that passion and love for sports. So everybody have a great weekend, and we'll talk again soon.